Good morning once again. You're with me, Coach 23, and you're here at the Pop and Wrestling Podcast where we talk wrestling, pop culture, and life in general. And like I said, my name is Coach 23, and a beautiful midweek hump day Wednesday. Still cloudy, but it's kind of humid. There's no wind at all. Yeah, so it's Wednesday, and this was supposed to be an NXT review show. However, due to the US elections, uh, NXT review will plus AEW, the Dynamite, whatever comes to my mind tomorrow will happen. And today we're about to talk about something else. And if you can look at the graphic right there, uh, it's about Extreme Championship Wrestling. This is apropos. Why? Because tomorrow at NXT will be produced. They're on the road, and they will be at the 2 and 300 Arena or venue in Philadelphia, which was formerly known as the ECW Arena, and which, when you hear the words ECW, kind of tribute happens. So tomorrow, I believe Don Marie will be a special guest referee. Bubba Ray will compete in a tag team match, teaming up with Trick Williams against Ethan Page and Ridge Holland. RVD will be there as well. So, and among other, probably among every other ECW alumni. So yeah, we're here to talk about the rise and fall on my perspective and what I've read, saw, watched, whatever heard from ECW. They have an interesting topic, or they really had an interesting journey in the world of wrestling business. So ECW started during the early or mid 90s when then president of ECW, or back then Eastern Championship Wrestling, Todd Gordon, hired Paul Heyman, or Paul E. Dangerously when he was known in the wrestling business back then, to be head of the creative. And back then, since they're like territory still, they are part of NWA. This was back then when NWA separated from WCW when Jim Crockett sold his company, or WCW, to Turner Network, and NWA now partnered with the local independent scene, and one of those independent companies was actually Eastern Championship Wrestling. And famously, ECW was born when, after Shane Douglas won a tournament to determine the NWA champion, won it, and he threw the belt and famously made that in the promo of, I'm not going to be a part of a dead promotion. You're not looking at the NWA champion, you are looking at the new ECW champion. And ECW champion doesn't stand for Eastern Championship Wrestling, but Extreme Championship Wrestling. Thus, ECW was born. So ECW, clearly during mid 90s to the latter part of the 90s, or the decade of 90s, was the clearly third company in terms of promotion between WWE, ECW, and WCW. Back then, WCW and WWE were fighting for number one and number two, and there was clearly a time, 3 weeks straight, that WCW beat WWE to be the number one promotion. So ECW was clear had the stranglehold for the number two promotion in the States. So the things with Extreme Championship Wrestling, or ECW, they have a great and rich history as well. They work with veterans like Terry Funk, Terry Gordy, Michael Hayes, I believe, at the time as well, and as veterans in helping them out, to produce newer talents like Tommy Dreamer, Sandman, Taz, among the other names there. Then, they are also the company that revitalizes careers of like Sabu, uh, Bam Bam Bigelow, the late Bam Bam Bigelow, Mick Foley, who was then known as Cactus Jack, uh, and they were really different compared to WWE and WCW. WCW was clearly the wrestling company. WWE was the sports entertainment company with a variety of characters, storylines. ECW was the hardcore wrestling. That's that difference. So the thing is with them, comparing to wrestling now, WWE clearly is still the sports entertainment plus wrestling company. Um, I'm simply sure. Oh, that. So, simple shirt. Then ECW was the hardcore wrestling. Light bulbs, steel chairs, barbed wires, exploding, you know, rings and whatnot. And yeah, so that's how they differentiate from those other two wrestling companies. Give me 1 second. So, uh, during the time, WCW has Turner Networks on their backing to produce for them to produce their shows. WWE has USA Network to produce their programs, or to show their programs. ECW didn't have any TV distribution back then, business wise. So they really are an independent company. They have maybe their TV deals are based more on syndication or like local states or local cities that they are being shown like a Wednesday morning. Wednesday morning, when you say Wednesday morning, it's like 2 a.m. So that's how their business works. They're just touring. Even if they're not touring, they're just staying at the ECW arena, which is like similar to what WWE at the time was doing with Monday Night Raw when they were just in the Manhattan Center, Hammerstein Ballroom. So they just have the ECW arena. They tour sometimes. Sometimes they have their talents tour in other wrestling independent companies, even in Japan. So that's how their company works. Uh, During the latter part of the 90s, Todd Gordon was still the president, but it was the face, basically the face of ECW was Paul Heyman. There was this rumor, I don't know if it's true or not, that in terms of creative power, it's always Paul Heyman that has the last say and not Todd Gordon. And Todd Gordon was the president. And there was this rumor that Todd Gordon was, under the payroll of WCW to, secure talents. He was the mole within the company, and at the time, when Paul Heyman learned about that, they usurped Todd Gordon. He bought the company for him to run himself, and that's what he did. He became the president of the owner and president of ECW, and lead and work on the company as he see fit. So he did introduce a lot of talents back then. Like I said earlier, Taz Sabu, which was like the main event scene or main rivalry in the independent scene. Taz and Tommy Dreamer. Raven, Tommy Dreamer, Raven and Sandman. Then of course the influx of other talents like Rob Van Dam, who was toiling the independent scene. And not just toiling the independent scene. He was shown in WCW and WWE programming, and even ECW, invaded WWE at Monday Night Raw during 1996, I believe, and showcased their talents for like the 1 hour show back then of WWE or 2 hour back then. ECW talents were there: Taz, Tommy Dreamer, Sabu, and yeah. ECW was clearly the rebel company because they talk trash not just against WCW, WWE. They talk trash against anyone. Like I said, they don't have a TV distribution. That's why they didn't have any that reach compared to WWE or WCW. Because at the time, one of Paul Heyman's plan was, to produce ECW as a pay-per-view company, similar with what TNA did earlier in 2002. they were pay per view only. So meaning you have to pay for like $10 to watch their programming every week. And for the ECW, that's what their plan is. The thing is, at the time, no pay per view distributor want to produce ECW or want to show ECW because at the time during the mid 90s when UFC was starting, former Senator John McCain uh, tried to institute to ban UFC to all 50 states in the US because of he termed it as human cockfighting. There's no rules. Yeah, back then when UFC didn't have any rules at all. They have rules, but not that strict compared to now. And many thought, according to Paul Heyman in an interview, many thought that the distributors, pay-per-view distributors, that ECW was similar or the same as UFC. That's why he had the difficulty of, come on, no, we're not. And he can't even show their product because most distributors thought that ECW is, human cockfighting like the UFC. Until 1996, 1995, the latter part 1995 to 1996. He was able to convince, I believe it was Direct TV or one of the pay-per-view distributors in the states to show ECW for its first pay-per-view. I know 1997 pay-per-view 1997, so it was barely legal. That was the title, ECW barely legal, and it was a successful show. It was a time that WWE wasn't doing really good in their business. That it was during WrestleMania 13, so violence really was like hardcore. So ECW was the precursor of the Attitude Era for WWE. ECW's mindset was, let's sell sex and violence to the wrestling fans. That's what their target demographic was at the time. You can't bring your kids. There was even this famous incident that they invited Kurt Angle in a Philadelphia show, and since ECW had the creative freedom for wrestlers, Raven and Sandman had an angle that Raven crucified Sandman in front of Kurt Angle, and Kurt Angle demanded to Paul Heyman that if you show this on TV with my face there, I'm going to sue you, and they didn't show that show. I guess it's in the WWE network now, since they bought out the ECW library, tape library, so it's probably there. Uh, but yeah, it was really a polarized ECW's polarizing company. There was even a time that I believe that they're like the developmental company for WWE, or not really WWE. Right now, let's interject this. Last week, WWE said that they will be producing WWID, which is they're paying like independent wrestlers to work for independent companies to improve themselves. So they're like, when I say it's like that, it's like WWE used to do it during the 90s as well. If you read Adam Copeland's book, he said that WWE hired him to be their wrestler, but there was no developmental contract yet, or the developmental company will pay you to wrestle in the independents to improve. So it's like, we'll pay you $500 a week. So I believe WWE has that now, and back then they do that with ECW. One famously wrestler known was Al Snow. Al Snow was a wrestler for WWE, but he wasn't really clicking. He went to ECW to improve, plus the head gimmick, and there you go. So there was this even rumor that WWE pays Paul Heyman like $1,000 a week as a stipend to be their developmental target, like create talent and you can send it to us. Because back then, Paul Heyman hated Eric Bischoff. They're cool now. And give me 1 second, guys. About that. So yeah. So those are the heavy rumors. Because, like I said, Paul Heyman used to hate Eric Bischoff at the time, but they're cool now. They're friends, according to them. But back then, business was really, savage. That ruthless enough to do what they do. So At the time, during the Attitude Era, WWE was booming. They became the overall number one company in the States and all over the world again. WCW was the clear second, and ECW was the clear third. So when the popularity of WWE grew, most TV networks are looking for other venues for wrestling. Of course, like I said, WCW was in the Turner networks. WWE was in with USA or Universal. Viacom, back then, they have a small cable television company called the Nashville Network, which is like a country music, not really country music, but more like a country channel. And they purchased the rights for ECW TV. So the ECW became like for like 1998 to 1999, they became like a cable TV company. They have a TV show for a cable company, and I believe they were placed for like the 10 p.m. schedule on a Friday, similar to what AEW Rampage is right now. So it's not really a good placing because in the States, most Friday nights, no one is really just at home sitting watching TV. Most of them are like in a sports bar, drinking, partying in a club. So it's like for Paul Heyman, it's like a that time slot, which is correct. They weren't really getting like 1 million viewers. I believe they're just getting like 200, 300, 400,000, maybe 500,000 people watching them, which is not really a bad uh, viewership at that time. But of course, back then, when a company, since like I said, the popularity of WWE and WCW, when you hear wrestling, people are watching. But of course, ECW was in that time slot. They were able to showcase their talents. And this was the time that most even ECW wrestlers are leaving the company. Wrestlers like Sandman and Raven, who left for WCW. Mike Awesome, who wrestled for ECW, wrestled for WCW as well. Taz and the Dudley Boys left for WWE. So the remaining like top talents for ECW at the time was like guys like Rob Van Dam, Jerry Lynn, Tommy Dreamer. Of course, eventually Sandman and Raven came back to ECW. So they weren't really building more stars. And at the time, around 1999, Viacom or WWE wasn't able to reach an agreement with USA Network, so they were looking for a new home. And eventually, Viacom called them, and you know what? You can be here. TNN, which is the Nashville Network, was renamed the National Network, which renamed to Spike TV during the early 2000s. So Spike TV was the precursor. TNN was the precursor for those for Spike TV. So at the time, of course, when you're WWE and you have you sold your license, your rights to a TV, you can't have any more show. And despite that, the ECW remained, I believe, during 2000, the latter part, the last quarter of 2000, still with Spike or BNN at the time, and WWE was shown Monday Night Raw back to back, I believe, with Ultimate Fighter, or before that, the Ultimate Fighter, UFC's Ultimate Fighter, when UFC was now known as an MMA sport. So WCW or ECW didn't have a home again. So after leaving the TNN, they don't have a home. They went back to their old roots of being like an independent programming, independent company. But this was also the time that Paul Heyman wasn't really doing good business. Checks are bouncing. He wasn't able to pay the wrestlers on time. That's why wrestlers are leaving for securing a paycheck. They're doing too much work for less money. And despite Paul Heyman's, effort, he decided, that I'm not going to work on this anymore. He left the company to Tommy Dreamer, and until Paul Heyman put all his money, his parents' money as well, to ECW, but there's no return of investment at all. Even with video game licensing, there's no return of investment at all. So he declared bankruptcy. I believe chapter 13 or chapter 11 for business to close ECW forever. The original, the OG ECW. So around first quarter of 2001, ECW folded. Most of the wrestlers just toiled the independent scenes. Paul Heyman himself signed with WWE to be a color commentator for Monday Night Raw after Jerry King Lawler left, and he also became a part of the creative team of WWE. So as far as the OG ECW, I like what Bubba Ray that he said. For all those Generation Zers, there was this thing called Napster during the latter part of the 90s or 2000s. Napster is the precursor to what BitTorrent or illegal streaming is. Napster was founded by Sean Parker, and his company or his website or whatnot has like a music library, and you can download it for free. So you can't. He was sued. He was bankrupted by the music producers and music artists because there's no money coming in to the artists and producers. But they changed the history. They changed the business of music at the time, because it's like you can do it. You can download it for free now. And like I said, precursor to BitTorrents and illegal streaming. But they revolutionized an industry. Same with what ECW did. So Bubba Ray Dudley said that Napster, what happened to Napster? Changed the business. What happened to Napster? It closed down. What is ECW to wrestling? It changed the business. And what happened to ECW? It closed down. So they call themselves the Napster of pro wrestling, which is really an appropriate comparison. But like you said, the ECW has like a range of history to the wrestling until now. And we can feel it until now. The violence of ECW. You can see it in GCW Game Changer Wrestling. You can see it in AEW, with all those hardcore stuff they do. Sometimes in WWE now. But back then, ECW was like the godfather for WWE's Attitude Era. When you see a beer drinking, foul mouth, swearing Stone Cold Steve Austin, before he was a beer drinker back then, it was Sandman. So before the sex that WWE Attitude sold back then, you can see it in ECW at the time. Even the hardcore wrestling. So ECW really had like stranglehold in the history of the wrestling business, and until now, like I said, it's being felt. 2005, WC before that, 2003, 2004, WWE produced The Rise and Fall of ECW for DVD, which is until now, I believe it was the highest selling DVD for WWE until 2005 when Rob Van Dam and Tommy Dreamer convinced Vince McMahon, what? ECW didn't really, go off the sunset, with like a proper goodbye. Can we do like one more? And they produced One Night Stand on June of 2005. And it's one of their most successful pay-per-views aside from WrestleMania that year. And they did it even in the Hammerstein Ballroom in Manhattan Center with like 2,000 or 3,000 fans there. And of course, WWE decided, we can do one more One Night Stand in 2006, and we can, I guess, revive the ECW. And yeah, ECW was revived under the WWE banner umbrella, but it wasn't the same. ECW became like more of the developmental show for WWE at the time, showcasing guys like CM Punk, John Morrison, Sheamus, among other wrestlers, Zack Ryder, among those people. They were just like a developmental company until they decided to close it down around 2010 or 2011, and they started NXT. And even though TNA started, try to have like a one night stand type of tribute to ECW when they did Hardcore Justice with Extreme 2.0, I believe. Extreme version 2.0, EV2 against, the Immortals. Give me 1 second, please. I'm waiting for a package. Maybe that's the reason for the pauses. Sorry, yeah. So yeah, ECW really had a rich history among the wrestling business, and even for me, I saw like back then during the 90s, there was this local video store, video shop where you can rent VHS tapes of wrestling. At the time, I was able to rent like WWE. I believe it was an In Your House 1997 or 1996. 1996, In Your House 1996. UFC 1 or UFC 2, I believe, and ECW, show for ECW. And it was really like, game changer. They really are a game changer in the wrestling business. I don't think that wrestling will be like this popular or this because of WWE's Attitude Era without ECW. And despite them being like the overall consensus top three for the wrestling companies during the 90s, they still have like that that impact among wrestling fans. And until now, that's why tomorrow at NXT they decided to go on the road. Let's show it in the 2300 Arena, formerly known as ECW Arena, and they have like ECW stars there again. So, despite Paul Heyman's shortcoming as a businessman, he did something good or even great for the wrestling business, and that's ECW. And until now, when you see like violence or hardcore stuff, especially even in WWE, people are chanting ECW, especially if you're in like the Philadelphia area. I'm sorry, like what they did WrestleMania 40. People are chanting ECW when they saw Bubba Ray Dudley during the 6-man tag team match between the Pride and the Final Testament. So that's how big and history that that ECW provided the wrestling business. So that's it for our wrestling talk, and we will go to our pop culture again, since this is also a pop culture uh, podcast. I was like thinking of what really has if you're talking about pop culture, what is like one of the top or in like the top, and I'm thinking like Star Wars. This is fun. This is actually weird for me. This is my CM Punk T-shirt. But hold on, I bought this like 2012. Shield. um, I like Star Wars more. Sorry to those who are going to watch this or hear this. I'm not really a big fan of like Lord of the Rings. I'm a fan of Harry Potter, but not Lord of the Rings, which is also like weird. But we'll talk Harry Potter maybe some other time. But I'm a fan of Star Wars more compared to like the medieval or realm stuff for some reason. As a kid, growing up in the 80s and 90s, uh, first time I saw Star Wars was with a channel called ABS-CBN, and during the 80s they have this every Sunday $1 million movies where they show movies, U.S. movies, and that's when and where I saw Star Wars first. I believe they showed for like 3 straight weeks of like A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. And I was hooked, and when I was a kid, because Darth Vader was like an awesome bad guy, who became suddenly like a good guy at the end of Return of the Jedi. So, no, there's no spoilers for Darth Vader, folks. Lightsabers, who doesn't love lightsabers? Han Solo, Harrison Ford as Han Solo, Chewbacca, their partnership was iconic as well. Luke Skywalker, Yoda, among those characters, and became hooked. And also, what I found it unique at the time when I was young is when they were like doing the space crawl of when they start the movie, and like the words or the paragraphs are floating in space. I was like, A New Hope is titled Episode 4, and Episode 5 for Empire Strikes Back, and Episode 6 for Return of the Jedi. I was like asking my mom, or my dad even, where's Episode 1? What's Episode 1? And they don't even know. until during the 90s, the latter part of the 90s, when suddenly uh, George Lucas, creator of Star Wars, said, "You know what? I am now going to show episode 1, 2, and 3." And like, so there's no episode 1, 2, and 3 at the time of Star Wars 4, 5, and 6. So I'm like, what? What the what? So they saw it, they produced it, and the Phantom Menace, was shown 1997, I believe. Then followed by Attack of the Clones during 2002, and then of course 2005 was Revenge of the Sith, and of course during the graphics for Star Wars 4, 5, and 6, it kind of sucked. But that thing is, most people, even people who understood it, well, my understanding, it was an independent movie. It's like the most successful independent movies of all time before selling it to 20th Century Fox. Then George Lucas, making it bigger, making it a saga and a bigger, Imagine this: George Lucas is a great filmmaker for this type of movies, and he sold the franchise of Lucasfilms and Star Wars to Disney for like $4.5 billion, and that's for like 6 movies and like one holiday special. Imagine that. That's how big Star Wars became. And right now, even if I'm a subscriber of Disney Plus here in Asia, here in the Philippines. If you look at Disney Plus, they have their own tab. Marvel has their own tab. Pixar. So that's how big Star Wars is now, and you can see like expanding the Star Wars universe or mythology, with continuing the saga of the Skywalker saga to episode 7, 8, and 9, Force Awakens, Return of the Jedi. I'm sorry, uh, Last Jedi, and the last one. The last one. No, Rise of Skywalker. Um, and now they have their own shows. They like expanded their TV shows, like the successful story of the Mandalorian, story of Boba Fett, Ahsoka Tano, or even the Obi-Wan Kenobi story during what happened to Obi-Wan Kenobi in between episode 4 and episode 3 and episode 4. What happened to him? So that's how Star Wars has become a bigger lore in terms of pop culture, because you cannot say pop culture anymore without thinking of Star Wars, without thinking of like Marvel, without thinking of anything. But Star Wars is actually up there. That's why Disney is such being a good business people, have the biggest mindset, decided to purchase, the Star Wars franchise from George Lucas for like almost $5 billion. That's awesome. Um, if you ask me, my favorite Star Wars movie, it really depends. I like Empire Strikes Back. I like Revenge of the Sith because of action. Nobody can beat that in terms of Star Wars fight. That awesome lightsaber fight between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker. Uh, Mustafar. I'm such a nerd, but don't get me wrong. I don't have many figures. I only have like 4. Yes, I only have 4 characters for Star Wars as action figures. I have the Mandalorian. I have the Legend Mandalore, Moff Gideon, and Grogu. Those are my only 4. But I'm such a nerd. I know the Mustafar scene. Um, for the last trilogy, I like Force Awakens. I mean, although I like the Rise of Skywalker as well, because it gave me like the one of my biggest goosebumps in terms of watching a movie when they did like the Avengers Endgame comeback, when, like I said, this is not a spoiler anymore. When Poe Dameron was like driving his X-wing and doesn't know how to fight, the last orders, spaceships, and then uh, got his name, Parisian, said, "Yeah, you have backup. The spaceships are coming flying out." That's like even now thinking of it, I have like goosebumps. because that's for me as a fan of Star Wars. That's how awesome their franchise is. And like I said, you cannot think of anything about pop culture without thinking about Star Wars. So the impact of you know, I guess we can tackle this. We can intertwine this with the early topic of ECW with Star Wars. You cannot say anything about a certain business aspect without thinking why. And for pop culture, like Star Wars is there, Back to the Future is there, Karate Kid, Indiana Jones, another awesome trilogy, another one. It's like I said, I was born in the 80s, raised in the 90s and 2000s. This are my programming. These were my movies. This was my show. And maybe I will try Lord of the Rings. Maybe one of these days. Um, just to know it. I love The Hobbit. I love the Hobbit movie series. But that's why I have no clue in my mind why I don't like Lord of the Rings or why I haven't tried Lord of the Rings. Don't get me wrong, folks. As far as pop culture, I don't have that wide range yet. Like I said, I haven't seen an episode of Game of Thrones. I haven't seen an episode of Breaking Bad, The Sopranos. I have my own weird like set of TV shows or movies like the DC Marvel shows. I like Suits. I like Lincoln Lawyer. I like Jack Ryan, like Reacher, among TV shows and whatnot. I haven't tried other things, but I have to expand my reach. I'm 41, and my time in this world is not that long, I guess, so I have to try all things. So, but yeah, it's an interesting thing as well. And to those who are not Star Wars fans, you are losing a lot if you're not a Star Wars fan, or at least haven't tried watching and understanding what Star Wars is. Like for me, what I'm losing for not understanding how Lord of the Rings work. So I'll recommend you guys try it. I know some people are saying the latter movies, last trilogy, suck. I don't know. It still entertained me. So all of it in the movie theater, and it's awesome for me because maybe I'm a fan. Like I said, even Star Trek. I like the newer version of Chris Pine, J.J. Abrams Star Trek compared to the Leonard Nimoy, William Shatner Star Trek. But I don't think I'll watch those because those are really old and I might not get my interest anymore. But it's an interesting thing that when we are talking about culture, we have to think a lot of things and not just it's just Marvel, it's just DC Comics. No, there's a lot of things. Star Wars is one, Lord of the Rings is one, Harry Potter, Star Trek, as I said earlier. So Star Wars will always and always will be a part of pop culture, whether it's a U.S. pop culture or around the world. It's a global, well-known part of pop culture, and this one is I highly recommend for you guys to watch and try it on your own because, like I said, there's no harm in trying. So yeah, wow, we have a short podcast today. Uh, Thank you for tuning in. For those newer viewers, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. You can subscribe, do it so. If you can like, that's even better. I don't know which one is better, subscribe or like, but you can do both. Spread the word. I'm just a normal guy trying to start a podcast. Like I said, this is uh, my outlet for me to relieve the stress of the world. And yeah, thank you for watching and listening for the Pop and Wrestling Podcast with me, Coach 23, and stay tuned because I have another bonus episode later.